Dust first, the fine pale kind that autumn kicks up off gravel lots. And under it, diesel from the idling buses. And under that, the wool and mothball smell of a field jacket that has spent 50 years folded in a cedar chest and only a handful of days actually worn. Dewey Tillman stood at the edge of the family bleachers with that smell rising off his own collar, and his hand went to his breast pocket the way another man's hand might go to a rosary. Why it went there, and why it kept going there every time the loudspeaker mentioned the depot's engraved wall of names, was not a thing he could have explained to anyone who asked, and no one had asked yet. "Reserve seatings for actual family," the young corporal with the clipboard said, not unkindly, already turning to wave the next knot of visitors toward the folding chairs at the far end of the field, where the sun would be worst and the speakers weakest. He'd said it to 3 people before Dewey and would say it to 5 after. He did not look at the jacket. He did not look at much of anything past the clipboard. Dewey did not argue. He never did. He shifted his weight, the tremor that lived permanently in his left hand quieting the moment his fingers closed over the leather in his pocket, and he let himself be moved, the way a man lets a current move him when he has already decided where the river ends up regardless. Here is what nobody in that gravel lot knew. Not the corporal with the clipboard, not the young families arranging their coolers, not even the recruit inside the depot fence pressing his uniform for the last time before he became, officially, a Marine. In a little under 3 hours, a full colonel in dress blues would be walking the reviewing line, would stop mid-stride in front of 400 witnesses, and would come to attention, chin up, spine locked, the whole practiced economy of 40 years of parade fields collapsing into something that looked, for one unguarded second, like a man remembering how to breathe. Because of a patch folded inside a cracked wallet in an old farmer's jacket pocket. If you've ever been looked past by someone who mistook your quiet for having nothing to offer, type steady in the comments. That was hours off yet. For now, there was only the walk to the overflow chairs, the diesel and the dust, and Dewey Tillman's hand finding his pocket again. The way water finds the low ground, without meaning to and without being able to help it. His hands told most of the story, if a person had known how to read them. The right one was steady, calloused along the base of the fingers in a groove 60 years of fence wire and harness leather had worn there, and 40 years of a rifle sling before that. The left one shook, faintly, always, except when it closed around something with purpose. The wallet, a coffee cup, the top rail of a stock pen, and then the shake stopped as if a switch had been thrown. He wore the jacket open over a flannel shirt gone soft as a dish rag at the elbows, and his boots, good leather once, were pale now with dust from a farm 2 counties over. The kind of dust that does not wash out, only fades. The wallet itself was nothing to look at, cracked along the fold, the stitching gone brown. It held no cash to speak of and no photographs, only a folded square of cloth pressed flat by decades of being carried and never taken out. A diamond of faded olive canvas, a reconnaissance insignia, one thread of tarnished silver run crooked through its center, where a 19-year-old's unsteady needle had missed the line, and nobody since had ever bothered or dared to fix it. Tucked behind the patch, worn nearly to pulp at its folds, was a card no bigger than an index card, its ink so faded that only someone who already knew what it said could have read it at all. He hummed while he waited, low, almost under hearing, 3 bars of a hymn that had nothing to do with graduations or Marine Corps depots and everything to do with an August kitchen thick with the smell of boiling tomatoes and canning jars ticking as they sealed. Marlene had hummed that same hymn every summer of their marriage, sealing jars two-fisted while sweat beaded at her hairline. And 6 years gone now, Dewey still found the tune rising in him unbidden whenever his hands had nothing else to do and his nerves had too much. His hands had nothing to do now. Somewhere past the fence, in a barrack smelling of floor wax and gun oil, his grandson was folding a uniform for the last time as a recruit and would walk out in a few hours as a Marine. And Dewey Tillman had raised that boy from the age of 9, after a stretch of highway on a rainy November night took Chase's mother and father both, and left an old farmer and his wife with a silent 9-year-old and no map for how to fill the silence. They had filled it anyway, Marlene with hymns and canning, and a hand always on the back of his neck at the table. Dewey with chores, handed over one at a time. A boy learning to mend fence and check a water trough, and later learning a hymns tune without ever being told why his grandfather's throat caught on it. Chase did not know his grandfather had ever worn a uniform. He knew Dewey as a farmer, a quiet man who fixed what broke and said little else. And if he had ever wondered why the old man's hand drifted to his jacket pocket whenever the depot loudspeaker crackled through a recitation of names carved into its granite wall, he had never asked, and Dewey had never once offered. That wall unsettled him in a way he had not examined closely even in his own mind, only felt, the way a man feels weather coming in his knee before he sees the clouds. The depot ran the way Major Blake Ellsworth liked everything to run, which was to say without a single visible seam. 400 family members seated on schedule. 300 recruits staged behind the reviewing stand in formations rehearsed to the half-step. A band tuned and ready. A public address system tested that morning down to the decibel. Ellsworth had built his career on precisely this kind of morning. The flawless ceremony. The photograph that ran in the base paper without a single chair out of alignment. He had never deployed, had never needed to. His war was logistics, and he had never lost a battle to a folding chair. He moved along the perimeter with his clipboard against his forearm, tapping his pen twice against it before every correction, a habit his staff had learned to read like weather. 2 taps meant a problem was about to become someone else's problem. He tapped it now, watching an old man in a faded field jacket shuffle along the gravel at a pace that was, by Ellsworth's internal clock, roughly a third of what the morning schedule allowed. "Sir, the family section's this way," Corporal Marissa Yancey said to Dewey, gently, falling into step beside him instead of ahead, which was already more patience than Ellsworth had budgeted for this particular guest. She was 23, new enough to the depot that she still read faces before she read rank, and something in this one, the stillness of it, a stillness that seemed to be doing work rather than resting, made her slow her own steps to match his. "Obliged," Dewey said, and nothing more, and kept walking at the same unhurried pace, his boots finding the gravel like a man who had spent a lifetime not wasting motion he didn't need. Ellsworth checked his watch, then the sun, then the loudspeaker technician's thumbs up, then the old man again, who had covered perhaps 40 yards in the time it had taken Ellsworth to run through his mental checklist twice. "Corporal," he said, not quite calling across the distance, not quite not. "We've got the wall of names recitation in 11 minutes, and the reviewing line needs this section clear." "He's the Tillman family, sir," Yancey said. "Recruit Tillman's grandfather." "Then he needs to be seated," Ellsworth said, tapping the pen twice, not touring the depot. He did not say it cruelly. He said it the way a man says something he has said 40 times that morning already, worn smooth of any weight. And that was in some ways worse, because it meant he had stopped seeing the person in front of him as a person at all, and started seeing him as a delay. Dewey's hand had gone again to his breast pocket, the way it did every time a loudspeaker test crackled the words, "Wall of Names," into the field. And for just a moment, his face did something none of them had a name for yet. A flicker, gone as fast as it arrived, like a man briefly remembering the weight of something he has spent 31 years being told he never carried. He said nothing about it. He kept walking. 2 families near the aisle had gone quiet in that particular way crowds do when they sense, before they understand, that someone is being handled rather than welcomed. A mother pulling her son's sleeve to stop him staring. A gray-haired man in a veteran's cap looking away as if the scene embarrassed him on Dewey's behalf. Ellsworth, missing all of it, turned back to his clipboard. "Corporal Yancey," he said, "get the old man situated somewhere he won't be underfoot. We've got a ceremony to run." Yancey did not answer right away. She looked at Dewey, who had stopped walking now, and stood with his weight settled, unbothered, waiting the way a fence post waits out weather, and something about that stillness made her hesitate longer than the order deserved. "Sir," she said finally. "Yes, sir," and the words came out thinner than she meant them to, because some part of her had already decided she was not going to do exactly what he'd asked. The gate volunteer wanted identification, which was reasonable, printed on a laminated card taped to her folding table, and Dewey patted his jacket pocket out of habit before he remembered his license was in the truck, 40 minutes away, in the glove box where he'd left it after fumbling with his keys that morning with a hand that would not quite behave. "I don't have it on me," he said. "Left it in the truck." "You're really his grandfather?" the volunteer asked. Not maliciously, just tired. 3 hours into a shift of checking names against a roster that had already been wrong twice that morning. "We've had 2 folks try to get into family seating who weren't on the list. I raised him," Dewey said, "since he was 9. It was not an argument. It was not even, particularly, an appeal. It was a fact laid down the way he might lay a board across a gap in fencing, flat and load-bearing and offered without decoration." And the volunteer looked at him a moment longer, uncertain what to do with a man who answered a question about his identity with something that sounded, oddly, like a vow. Marissa Yancey was close enough to catch the exchange, and closer still when Dewey shifted his weight to dig through his jacket for anything with a name on it. An old feed receipt, a folded church bulletin, and the wallet came half out of the inside pocket, its flap falling open against his palm. She saw the patch first, olive canvas gone the color of weak tea, the crooked run of silver thread through its center catching what little light made it under the bleacher awning. And behind it, for just a second before he closed the flap again, she saw the card. 3 words, hand-printed in pencil so old the graphite had gone silver gray and half vanished into the paper's grain. She did not know what the words meant. She read them anyway, the way anyone reads a thing not meant for them, quickly and against her better judgment, and they stayed with her the rest of the morning like a splinter she couldn't work free. 3 words that seemed, somehow, larger than the scrap of paper carrying them. She said nothing to Ellsworth. Instead, without asking permission she suspected wouldn't be given, she walked Dewey Tillman quietly around the gate volunteers table and into the 3rd row of the family section, the good row, the one with a clear line to the reviewing stand, and sat him down before anyone could tell her not to. "Thank you, miss," Dewey said. "Yes, sir," she answered, and did not know, yet, why she'd used that word instead of the one she'd have used an hour before. Colonel Otis Purdy walked the reviewing line the way he had walked every reviewing line for 40 years, hands loose at his sides, eyes moving without seeming to move, a man performing a habit so old it had stopped requiring effort. 74 years, in a body that still carried itself like a much younger man's, called back to Talomere for this one posting because someone in personnel had remembered his name belonged to this depot's history, though even they had not known quite how much. He was 3 families down from the Tillman row, exchanging a word with a proud mother, when something at the edge of his vision made him stop. It was not sudden. Whitfield's habits of 31 years ago had prepared a printed record and a granite wall to eclipse it long before Purdy ever walked this line, and no ceremony committee, no clipboard, no protocol officer had ever set out to hide a patch tucked in an old man's jacket. But Dewey Tillman had shifted in his seat, and his jacket had fallen open, and there, plain as a brand, was a diamond of faded olive canvas with one crooked thread of silver running through its center. Colonel Otis Purdy stopped walking. He stood for perhaps 3 full seconds without moving at all, and in a body trained for 4 decades never to waste emotion in public, 3 seconds of pure stillness reads like an earthquake. Then his heels came together, his spine locked, his chin lifted, and his hand rose in the correct and formal accounting of the salute, due not to rank, because Dewey Tillman wore no rank on his shoulders, but to something the United States Marine Corps had taught Otis Purdy to render when nothing else in the moment made sense to do. "Tillman," he said, and his voice, famous on this depot for never once cracking through 4 decades of drill, cracked down the middle of that single word like dry wood. Dewey Tillman. 400 people went silent almost at once, the way a field goes silent before weather. Major Blake Ellsworth, 20 yards off, clipboard raised mid-gesture to signal the band, froze with his arm half lifted and his pen still resting against the board, and did not lower either for several seconds. Because nothing in any rehearsal, any checklist, any flawless morning he had ever run had prepared him for a full colonel standing at attention in front of the bleachers, addressing an usher's problem by name. "Sir," Yancey said very quietly to no one. "That's the patch." Purdy lowered his hand only after a long moment, and when he spoke again, it was not to Dewey but to the bleachers, in the plain, restrained cadence of a man choosing every word because he knows a crowd will remember all of them. "That patch belongs to a long-range reconnaissance element that does not exist by that designation anymore," he said. "I served beside the man wearing it. 56 years ago, on a night I do not discuss, that patch and the man inside it walked 11 miles of bad ground to bring back 3 Marines who would otherwise not have come back at all. One of them was me." He looked at Dewey, and for a moment neither man said anything, because some debts do not have a sentence built for them. "Sir," Dewey said finally, and it was the first word he'd offered to any of it, "it's good to see you standing." The line landed soft as a hand on a shoulder, and somewhere in the bleachers, a gray-haired man in a veteran's cap began quietly to cry. Major Ellsworth recovered his composure with the speed of a man whose career had trained him to recover composure quickly, and recovery, for Blake Ellsworth, meant fixing the moment for the crowd before he had fixed it for himself. He crossed to the small staff tent behind the reviewing stand, where a laptop held the depot's official archive, the printed unit history due to reprint that very week, confident he could put the colonel's story on the record in front of everyone within minutes and turn an unscripted disruption into the best photograph of his career. He typed the unit designation. He typed the date, an approximation drawn from Purdy's own words. The wall of names recitation script glowed on the screen beside the official history entry for the action Purdy had just described to 400 witnesses. And Ellsworth read it once, then again, then a third time, as if repetition might change what the screen said. The printed history credited that extraction to a different officer entirely, a name that was not Tillman, a name carved at this moment into actual granite on the depot's wall of names not 200 yards from where Purdy stood. Ellsworth felt something go cold in his chest that had nothing to do with the autumn air. He had built his entire morning, his entire reputation for flawless ceremony, on the assumption that the depot's own paperwork was a fixed and trustworthy thing. And for the first time in his career, the paperwork had just contradicted a full colonel standing at attention in front of a crowd he could not uninvite. He found the records office extension on his phone, with hands that were, for once, not quite steady. And Corporal Yancey found him there, still staring at the screen. "Sir," she said, "there's a card in his wallet. I saw it. Coordinates, maybe, or something like them, handwritten." Ellsworth did not look up right away. "Get me the archive custodian," he said, and something in his voice had lost its usual clipped confidence, gone instead flat and careful. A man realizing the ground under his flawless morning had never been as solid as his checklist promised. The archive custodian, when she answered, delivered the second blow without meaning to. "The action reports underlying that era of unit history were sealed," she explained, "kept separate from the printed history, precisely because the printed volumes had been condensed and edited decades ago by administrative staff, and any correction to the printed record required her signature to unseal the originals for verification. She was retiring Friday. Her replacement did not start until the following Monday, and the reprint of the depot's official unit history, the one with the wall of names recitation script drawn straight from its pages, locked for the printer at noon Tuesday. 2 days. Ellsworth looked at the tent flap, at the bleachers beyond it where Purdy still stood with Dewey Tillman, and understood. With the particular sickness of a man who prides himself on flawless events, that his morning had just become something he did not know how to fix with a clipboard. Purdy came to the tent himself once the ceremony's opening formalities allowed him a breath, and he did not ask permission before pulling up a folding chair across from Ellsworth and the glowing screen. "Show me," he said, and Ellsworth turned the laptop toward him without argument, because whatever chain of command existed between a retired colonel serving as reviewing officer and an active duty major running logistics had quietly reorganized itself in the last 10 minutes. Purdy read the printed entry twice, the way a man reads something he already suspects is wrong and is only confirming the shape of the wrongness. Then he asked for the card. Dewey did not hesitate. He drew the wallet from his breast pocket, opened the cracked flap, and set the small pencil-worn card on the table between them, its 3 faded words facing up for the first time in decades to anyone but himself. A string of numbers and letters, a grid coordinate, and beneath it, in the same hand, 2 words that had gone soft as breath with age. Purdy studied it a long moment. "That's the extraction point," he said quietly. "I'd know those numbers if I were dead." He looked up. "This matches the sealed report, not the printed one, the one nobody's touched since it went into the vault." Ellsworth felt his stomach drop the last of the way. "The sealed report is the original," he said, working it through out loud, the way a man talks himself into a conclusion he doesn't want. "The printed history was compiled later, condensed. Somebody could have—" "Somebody did," Purdy said. He was already reaching for his own phone, scrolling through a contacts list 40 years deep, the kind of list that has colonels and clerks and record keepers in it in equal measure. There was an administrator here, records and awards, name of Regis Whitfield, retired now. There were rumors, back when I still had rank enough to hear rumors, about rosters getting quietly adjusted for men who needed a citation to make a promotion board. Nobody proved anything. Nobody looked very hard. He set the phone down. "I'd guess if we pull the sealed file, we'll find Whitfield's initials on whatever memo moved this credit from Tillman's name to somebody else's, 31 years ago, filed the same year I remember him being reassigned to a desk with a much better view." It was not violence, what Whitfield had done. It was a pen, and a favor, and a promotion board somewhere that never knew the difference. And it had sat quietly, correct-looking, on a depot wall for 3 decades, because nobody with the standing to question it had ever thought to ask. "So we unseal the file," Ellsworth said, reaching already for his phone, some of his old briskness returning now that the problem had a shape he recognized. "We call the custodian back. She's already gone for the day," Yancey said from the tent flap, where she'd been listening, phone in hand. "I called the records office. She said the case files for that era went into storage boxes this morning. Transport scheduled for 4 o'clock to the regional archive facility. Once that box leaves the depot gate, it's under a different custodian's authority, and the paperwork to request access again runs 6 to 8 weeks minimum." Ellsworth checked his watch. 2 hours. "Then we stop the truck," Purdy said, standing, "and I'll sign whatever needs signing, because apparently my rank was good for exactly nothing 31 years ago, and I intend to spend some of it now." The flag detail formed up in the last light of the ceremony. 4 Marines moving through a sequence, rehearsed until it looked less like drill than like breathing, and the crowd came to its feet in the particular hush that a folded flag always produces, a silence with weight to it. Ellsworth was already gone from the bleachers by then, his staff car pulling out through the depot's rear gate at a speed that would have earned any recruit a talking to, chasing a truck loaded with 31 years of sealed paper. Dewey did not know that yet, not the truck, not the 2-hour window narrowing by the minute. He knew only that his grandson stood in the 3rd rank from the left, uniform pressed to a crease you could shave with, eyes fixed forward the way 3 months of training had taught him to fix them, and that the flag was coming down and being folded into its triangle with the same slow reverence it always was. And then he heard it. Faint, almost swallowed by the depot's grounds noise. Chase's lips were moving, not to any cadence the drill instructors had taught him, but to a tune Dewey knew in his bones before he consciously placed it. The same 3 bars, hummed low, that Marlene had sung over boiling tomato jars every August of her life, that Dewey had passed to the boy across a decade of shared chores, without ever once explaining where it came from or why it mattered, only that some Sundays it needed singing, and some evenings it needed humming, and the boy had absorbed it the way boys absorb everything that isn't explained to them, by simply carrying it forward. Dewey's hand did not go to his jacket pocket this time. It went instead flat against his own chest, over the place where a heart does its plain, unglamorous work. And for one unguarded second, the stillness that had carried him through gate volunteers and dismissive majors and 56 years of an uncorrected record broke entirely. Water finally finding a low place to go. Purdy, standing beside him now that the ceremony structure no longer required his position in the reviewing line, saw it and said nothing, only stood closer, the way one old man stands beside another when words would only get in the way. When the ceremony released the new Marines to their families, and Chase came across the grass at something not quite a run, still buttoned into a discipline 3 months deep, Purdy tried once more, in front of the small crowd that had gathered, to say what the depot owed this man. "Mr. Tillman deserves every honor this depot can." "I didn't come for the wall," Dewey said, cutting him off, gently, the way a man closes a gate rather than slams it. "I came for the boy." The bleachers had mostly emptied by then, and it was a smaller circle that heard it, but it landed on the ones who did the way a stone lands in still water, rings moving out long after the stone itself has gone quiet. "There were others out there with me that night," Dewey went on, before Purdy could answer. "2 men who never got their names on anything, right or wrong, because nobody was arguing about whose citation it was back then. If the wall's getting fixed, I'd be obliged if their names went up beside mine. Not just mine alone." He looked at Chase, who stood close now, uniform crisp, face full of a question he hadn't yet found words for. "That's the only asking I've got in me." Blake Ellsworth came back through the depot's rear gate a few minutes past 6 that evening, and the staff car pulled in slower than it had left. None of the earlier urgency left in it. Only the flat tiredness of a man who has spent an afternoon undoing something he did not build, but had, without knowing it, been standing guard over. He found Purdy and Dewey and Chase still near the now empty bleachers, the last of the family crowds trickling toward the parking lots. "We got it," Ellsworth said. "Stopped the truck 4 miles out. Custodian met us at the gate and unsealed the box before she clocked out for the last time. The original action reports exactly what you said, Colonel. Coordinates match. Whitfield's initials are on the amendment memo that moved the credit, dated 31 years back, quarter after he was up for reassignment." He paused, and something in his posture, so precisely upright all morning, had gone looser, less rehearsed. "The wall of names gets corrected before Tuesday's reprint. All 3 names. I'll see to it myself." He did not tap his pen against his clipboard when he said it. He had, at some point in the last 2 hours, stopped needing to. "Thank you, Major," Dewey said, and offered nothing more, because he had never needed more than that from anyone, only the thing itself done right. Weeks later, on an evening with the kind of October light that comes in low and gold through a kitchen window and asks nothing of anyone, Dewey Tillman sat at his own table with the kettle just beginning to sing on the stove behind him. On the windowsill above the sink, where Marlene's reading glasses had rested untouched for 6 years, a small wooden frame now stood beside them, holding a square of faded olive canvas with one crooked thread of silver running through its center, the coordinate card resting flat beneath the glass alongside it. The old wallet that had carried both for 56 years sat empty now in the kitchen drawer, its cracked leather finally at rest, nothing left inside it that needed carrying in secret anymore. A letter from Chase's first duty station lay propped against the sugar bowl, unopened only because Dewey liked to save the reading of it for after the tea was poured. He hummed, low, the same 3 bars, and the kettle answered him in its own way. And outside the light went on falling gold and unhurried across a yard that had never once needed a wall to know what it was worth. Some debts take 56 years to come due, and they always come due in full.